Len McCluskey, welcome to Hard Talk.
Thank you.
I think nobody would argue that Brexit is the defining issue in Britain today, perhaps the biggest decision the country has had to make for a generation and more. Would you agree it has proved to be extraordinarily difficult to find a coherent position in the left, the Labour movement?
Well, I think the reality, Stephen, is, of course, 2.5 years ago, your question was spot on. The decision that the British people were asked to make was a defining decision. My union campaigned strongly, more than anybody else, more money, more resources, on the platform of Remain and Reform. Unfortunately, we lost, and therefore we have a situation where the British people have decided that they want to leave the European Union. The big issue, therefore, is not that it's the end of the world, because it isn't, but what kind of agreement can you strike in order to leave the European Union? Unfortunately, we've had a Conservative government that has effectively wasted 2 years arguing amongst itself.
Well, let's go through this step by step. Not so long ago, in an interview with a German magazine, just actually before Christmas, Jeremy Corbyn said Brexit cannot be stopped, quite baldly and simply. Do you agree?
I think he was making the point that...
But do you agree?
I think he was making the point that the electorate haven't decided that we should leave, Article 50 having been triggered. He was effectively saying we have to get on with it. It can't be stopped, and we need now to concentrate our energies, all our energies, on trying to strike a deal that can be acceptable to our nation.
But of course, it can be stopped. I mean, you know it can be stopped. Everybody knows it can be stopped. It can be stopped because the British government could unilaterally revoke Article 50, which would mean that we stay in the EU. The European courts have already ruled on that. Or indeed, the British government could seek a delay of the leaving of the European Union to give time, for example, for a second referendum. So to say it can't be stopped is factually wrong.
They can certainly delay the question of Article 50, and it's my view that they should delay it. At the moment, we're in a position where it looks as though the Prime Minister's deal is going to be defeated in Parliament. And then there's a number of sequences that we have to go through. A vote of no confidence, a vote by Parliament as to whether or not it's acceptable for a no deal, which would be catastrophic in my opinion. And therefore there needs to be a solution and a way out of this. I'm hoping that the government will accept that there needs to be an extension of Article 50 to give more time for debate and discussion.
So did Corbyn misspeak then?
I don't think he did.
Can't be
no,
stopped?
I don't think he did. And the first question you asked me was, is there any cohesion in a policy on the left for Brexit? Well, 18 months ago, Jeremy Corbyn put to the British people a manifesto that gave a way out. He came within touch and distance of power. Had Corbyn won that election, I believe now we would be out of the European Union, or by the 29th of March, but we would have an agreement, an agreement that united the nation, both the 48% and the 52%.
Well, let's just pick away at that a little bit. Jeremy Corbyn says he has the basis for an agreement with the EU 27. He says, frankly, if he were in power, he could deliver it very quickly. That patently is not credible, because we had the President of the Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker, and every single head of government of the EU 27 saying that the deal that Theresa May, after tortured negotiation, the deal she finally struck with the EU 27 was not just the best deal available, but the only deal available.
No, I don't accept that. I mean, the reality is that had Labour won the last election, then I believe we would now have an agreement, because there was a different approach from Corbyn than Theresa May. If you recall back then, Theresa May took a very aggressive stance, as though we were going to tell the other 27.
You can't rewrite history, Mr. McCluskey. And as I say to you, in the last few weeks and months, the message from Europe's been simple. This is the best deal. This is the only deal. So that is where we are. So when Labour says, oh, well, we'll go back to Brussels, we'll negotiate a completely different deal.
I think they can.
But patently they can't. Not only because the EU, you can't negotiate with people who aren't.
You're making the mistake of assuming that Europe would treat a Labour Party and a Labour government in a different way that they treated a Conservative government. And that's rewriting history, because when you say that this deal has been thrashed out after torturous negotiations, that's patent nonsense. We didn't have any negotiations. We had no negotiations at all, which was a clarity, other than a Conservative government who were trying to be aggressive. And we finally are told that in the final weeks, as we ran up and ran out of time, they thrashed out 24 hours a day, working hard to thrash out a deal that isn't a deal. What Labour would have done, had they been in power, they would have approached Europe and said, our people have decided they want to come out, and we're going to respect that, but we want a close relationship with you. We want access to a tariff. We want, Stephen, let me make this point. We want access to a tariff-free single market. So do Europe.
Let's talk about where we are today. There's no point either of us dwelling too much on what might have happened in the past. Where we are today is that there is an extraordinary rift developing between people such as yourself and Jeremy Corbyn, the most influential figures at the top of the leadership of the Labour movement, and the memberships, both of your union and the Labour Party, who poll after poll revealed in the last few weeks want a second referendum. They want the chance, now that they've seen what deals are available, they want the chance to vote now on whether to push ahead with Brexit or not.
Well, what opinion polls are we talking about? Are these the same opinion polls that said that Remain would win comfortably? Are these the same opinion polls that said that Labour would be annihilated 18 months ago and it might be the end of the Labour Party? The problem with opinion polls is that they have no credibility anymore.
Don't they, in your view, no credibility? When all of the polling agencies, I'm just looking at one, the most recent one I've seen, January 2nd, YouGov poll of 1,034 Labour members, 72% support a second referendum. Just 18%. It's not even close. 18%.
But you've just seen another opinion poll this week indicating that 56% of Labour members are happy with the manner in the way that Corbyn has dealt with this whole situation.
You represent Unite. You've got more than 1 million members. You're the biggest trade union in Britain. Listen to one young Unite member, Elsie Greenwood, who wrote this open letter to you. Members that Len McCluskey is meant to represent, a big majority of them, young people such as myself, think our union should back a people's vote. It is clear that decisions regarding Brexit go past party lines. Hang on, it's important to finish this. Unite jobs. My union members, colleagues, members' jobs are at risk, and it is a fact that people, including Len, need to recognise.
I'm delighted that someone like Elsie is a member of my union and is active. More power to her elbow. I have 1.4 million members, and so reading out,
as far as we can tell from all of the polling evidence, a clear majority of your members.
No, that's not true.
It is true.
No, it isn't true. I'm the best judge of what our members want, because we do constantly over 2 years, not an opinion poll. I don't know who the sample was. We've had a Brexit watch since the referendum results, and at that time and right through, there doesn't appear to be any great movements within what our members say. Last year at my policy conference, 2.5-hour debate, high-level contributions, and we arrived at a particular policy. Our policy desperately is to have a general election. That's the people's vote that I want. A general election that will enable the British people to make a judgment on going forward, including on the question of Brexit.
But as you know, going back to the world of reality, it is not likely that the Labour Party and other opposition members of Parliament can force a general election.
I don't know that that's true yet, Stephen. I do not know that that's true. There are sequences to go through. There'll be votes of no confidence. We don't know what the DUP are saying if this deal is being forced through. We don't know whether they will withdraw their support for the government, and that will make it impossible for the government to continue.
Well, you're right, we're in the realm of uncertainty, but I just, again, want to pick away at the way in which the Labour movement has been divided on this issue. So let's move away from opinion polls. Let's just look at what other people in similar positions to yours have concluded. For example, TUC leader, that is the amalgamation of trades unions in the UK, Frances O'Grady, she in her New Year's message made it quite plain that as far as she was concerned, Britain's workers need a second referendum. That is the only way, she said, to protect members' jobs. Some of the biggest unions, your colleagues in the GMB, for example, have now made it their official union policy that there should be a second referendum. Why is your conclusion so different from all of theirs?
Because both the GMB and the TUC and Unite have a common policy that we want a people's vote, and we're calling it a general election. And that's precisely what the TUC policies is. And my colleagues in the GMB, I'm very close to their leader, want exactly the same thing. Now, you have to go through a number of sequential steps in order to see whether or not that should happen. The truth of the matter is, I don't often agree with Jacob Rees-Mogg, but he said just a few weeks back when nearly 40% of Conservative MPs voted against the Prime Minister, he said it would be normal convention for the Prime Minister to step down. I believe that is still an issue. The Prime Minister has lost authority, credibility, and her government has lost the right to govern. Now, in those circumstances, Labour has to pursue its policies.
Sure, but if Labour cannot deliver on a general election, then you surely are duty-bound to consider the other options.
Of course.
But unlike many of your colleagues, you do not want to talk about a second referendum.
No, Stephen, that's not strictly true. I wrote an article just recently saying a second referendum now looks very likely. It's not the preferred option for our movements, but my policy...
A second referendum for you now looks very likely.
In terms of the political developments, I made a statement that that is emerging. My union's policy is, and
can I just stop you just for a second? Because if you think a second referendum is very likely, your phrase now, what would Unite's position be going into a second referendum?
If there was a referendum, requiring people to vote on remaining in the European Union, my union's position would be to remain in Europe. But the reality at the moment... No, Steve.
No, this is really...
Well, what I'm saying is really important for me. Labour ran an election 18 months ago, and the manifesto was clear. It would accept the democratic vote of the referendum, and it would take us out of Europe, but it would negotiate a deal. The mess that we are in is because this government, and Theresa May clinging on to power, has put us into this situation. There's a vacuum. Colleagues are now talking about Norway plus. Because of the vacuum, people are desperate. The one thing that unites everybody at the moment, well, two things. Firstly, the deal is not good enough. And secondly, there should not be a no deal. Now, in the situation where day by day things change, my union will look at these developments very closely. That's our policy.
Yes,
and we will make decisions. My executive
if I may say so, you've made a major change. I'm just looking at the September 2018. You declared that remaining in the EU must not be an option in any new referendum. You are telling me today that you think a referendum is very likely, and that if it does come, your union will advocate Remain.
No, if we have a referendum and the likelihood of it changes, you're quoting me in September, the likelihood of it now being a referendum has waned dramatically. If by some...
Sorry, surely you mean not waned, but it's increased.
No.
You don't think the referendum chances have increased?
I think what is happening here is the government's stance, remember, has shifted dramatically as well. I think where we're at is that the sequencing of what we're going through will reach a point. The deal is rejected. There'll be a number of other options, including today we're talking about an amendment to the finance bill that may say you cannot have a no-deal Brexit. That has to bring with it an extension of Article 50. And then debate and discussion has to take place in relation to, well, what are the options? An option of a general election, I'm sorry, an option of a general election is still very much on the cards.
Isn't the truth behind all of this detail and the complications, and you're absolutely right, there's so much uncertainty, isn't the truth that you and your close ally, Jeremy Corbyn, actually don't want Britain to be in the EU
Oh, no,
anymore?
well, you should have come with me when we were campaigning in the referendum. I went all over the country, as did Jeremy Corbyn, on the same platform, Remain and Reform. Remain and reform. The idea that Europe is some panacea for working people is just not true. The real problem
but that's my point. You and Corbyn actually feel that you can deliver your socialist project for Britain much more effectively outside the European Union.
No, the reality is that what we argued for was a reformed Europe, and we've been vindicated. We've got the rise of the fascist and neo-fascist right wing right across Europe. We've got Austria, we've got Italy with neo-fascists running their governments now. Our appeal to our European counterparts was austerity, which is crippling the whole of Europe, including Britain, needs to be changed. Otherwise, people will look for an alternative.
If you're suggesting to me that the political colour of the EU is increasingly right and centre-right and antipathetic to the interests of the Labour movement, and you're also telling me that you see no sign of the EU prepared to take on what you would regard as necessary reform, we come back to this point, and Jeremy Corbyn put it in a Guardian newspaper interview recently, where he said, I don't want to be told by somebody else, he meant in the EU, that we can't use state aid in order to be able to develop industry in this country.
And that's
why not be honest with me and say, you know what, we're done with the EU. It's over for us.
Well, obviously, we've had a referendum result that tells us that we're done with the EU. We're coming out of the EU. That's what the referendum is. We very rarely have referendums. Referendums are not like general elections. Referendum is a specific question on a specific issue. We've had that, and therefore saying that we are out of the European Union doesn't negate the fact that what Labour would have done was take us out of the European Union, but would have negotiated a deal that would have united the nation. What is totally disingenuous at the moment is the Prime Minister trying to say she's trying to just carry out the wishes of the British people. She's done nothing to placate the 52% who voted Leave. So they voted Leave for two main reasons: the forgotten towns and cities who've been deindustrialised. The Conservative government say nothing about investing in those communities.
Okay,
and the whole issue of migrant labour, which is a second reason why people voted, the Conservative Party have said absolutely nothing about it.
Well, all right, so let's stick with that for a moment. A lot of polling evidence, I know you're not so keen on the polling evidence, but a lot of evidence suggests that one of the key reasons why Britain voted 52% to leave the European Union is because people were very exercised about migration.
Yeah.
Felt too many people were coming into this country, not least from the European Union, and wanted to do something about it. So if you're saying the Tories are offering nothing on that, what's Labour offering?
Labour is offering labour market regulations. So Jeremy Corbyn has said, when we come out of Europe, if Labour were in government, when we come out of Europe, the free movement of labour would stop. However, it would be replaced by a mobility of labour, because if you're negotiating access to a tariff-free single market, then you have to deal with one of the other fundamentals in the European Union, the free movement of labour. Call it a mobility, mobility of labour agreement, but it would be based on labour market regulations at the moment. And it's not migrant workers who are to blame for this. Migrant workers are just like you and me, looking to make a better life for themselves and their family. It's the greedy bosses who use migrant labour to undercut pay and conditions.
I'm a little confused.
and cause so much distress amongst our communities.
Right, you want to be in the closest of close relationships with the single market, but you want to completely end the principle of free movement of labour. I'm struggling to see how the EU would buy that, but nonetheless...
Of course it would. We're being told... I remember a discussion, I don't often quote Tony Blair, but I remember an interview he did a few months back where he said, look, we can stay in Europe because we can still reach an agreement over the free movement of labour. I've spoken to many European leaders about it. The reality is, of course, you can have labour market regulations if you negotiate that in the deal.
I want to keep this as simple as possible. In a socialist, Corbyn Corbyn-led Labour government, would there be a pledge to cut migration
It's not about cutting migration.
So there will be no pledge to do that?
Well, pledges. What pledge has a government ever give on immigration that it's ever come anywhere near to? It's dishonest. And the one thing about Corbyn is he's not dishonest. The situation will be that under a Labour government, there would be labour market regulations which would stop the abuse of working people, including migrant workers. Now, the result of that, in my opinion, is there'll be a reduction of migrant labour coming into the country, because if greedy bosses can't use and abuse them, they won't do. They won't call upon them.
Just before we end then, just another thought about the future of a notional Corbyn-led socialist Labour government in a Britain post-Brexit, which you say is inevitable. Brexit is going to happen. Every single economic analysis run by the Bank of England, the OBR, the IMF, whoever you care, all the independent and other analysts say, whatever the form of Brexit, Brexit is going to be a net negative to the UK economy. The UK economy is going to be smaller after Brexit than it would have been had Brexit not happened. So in that context, how does John McDonnell, who is going to be the putative Chancellor of this Labour government, deliver on all of the spending promises, the socialist building infrastructure investment programmes that he has promised?
John gave the best answer when he was asked that question. He said he'd found the magic money tree. It was planted in the Cayman Islands, and he was going to uproot it and bring it back to the UK. There is £40 billion a year robbed from you and I, from the Treasury, by the greedy fat cats and the corporates.
That builds a socialist Britain, does it? Just the money that comes from the Cayman Islands and offshore tax
Of course it would. It would help.
Really?
£40 billion a year, damn right it would. And the reality is that Labour is given promises that ordinary working people are interested
Frankly,
in.
A disorderly no-deal Brexit, according to all the analysis, could cost up to 8 or 9% of GDP over the next 10 years. How is 40 billion from offshore tax accounts going to solve that hole?
A disorderly no-deal Brexit. Well, I agree with that. That would be catastrophic. That's why we're opposed to it. We don't want a no-deal Brexit.
But the stance of the Labour Party today may de facto make that disorderly Brexit all the more likely. You could be the enablers of that Brexit.
But that is so facile an accusation. It amazes me. The reality is it was a Conservative Prime Minister who gave us a referendum. It was a Conservative Prime Minister, David Cameron, that did it in a short space of time, 12 weeks, when we were telling him, give us a lot longer. In Scotland, they had 18 months. It's a Conservative Prime Minister in terms of Theresa May, who has now wasted 2 years with internal divisions, and suddenly commentators want to try to blame Jeremy Corbyn for bringing about Brexit. That's unfair and it's wrong. If Labour was in power now, we would have an agreement with Europe that would unite our nation and would make certain that our economy, rather than slipping backwards with their investments in regional investment banks and national investment banks, with the ability to invest on manufacturing, we'd have an economy that was growing with real jobs, decent jobs, well-paid jobs, and not the precarious race to the bottom that we currently have.
Len McCluskey, we have run out of time, but I thank you very much for being on Hard Talk. Thank you very much.